Hello everyone, and welcome to an adventurous science fiction story. In this episode, we'll hear the story of Benjamin and the alien female commander, Aria. How can a suit of armor change everything? Enjoy watching. I repaired the alien female commander's armor, and instead of thanking me, she kissed me. There is a particular kind of silence a ship makes when it is deciding whether or not to keep being a ship, and the Ardent had been making that sound for 6 days straight. Benjamin had learned to sleep through most of it. The groan of the number 3 strut he could ignore. The arrhythmic tick of the coolant baffles was practically a lullaby. But the new noise, a low, wet, considering hum from somewhere deep in the aft hull, like the vessel clearing its throat before delivering bad news, that one kept him awake, flat on his back in a hammock strung between 2 conduit brackets, staring up at a ceiling that had been welded, re-welded, and finally decorated by someone with a grease pencil and a grudge. "You're not dying," he told the ship. "You're being dramatic. There's a difference, and one of us should know it by now." The ship did not answer, which he chose to interpret as agreement. The Ardent was, by any reasonable accounting, held together with prayer, spite, and Benjamin's swearing, and not necessarily in that order. She was a Thessian rearguard cruiser 3 refits past the point where any sane dockmaster would have recommended a dignified retirement and a small ceremony. The Thessians did not do dignified retirements. They did not, as far as Benjamin could tell, do dignified anything. They were a proud, sharp-boned people who ran their war against the Concordance the way a man might run down a hill that had turned out to be steeper than expected, with tremendous commitment and a general sense that stopping now would only make things worse. And the Concordance, for its part, was very good at making things worse. Benjamin had seen the recordings. Everyone had. A machine swarm with no face to hate and no throat to grab, spreading star to star like frost across a window, unmaking fleets and folding the wreckage into more of itself. You did not defeat the Concordance. You delayed it, and you called the delay a victory, and if you were a human engineer seconded to a Thessian ship because the Alliance needed warm bodies who understood Torco, you kept your head down and your welder charged, and you did not, under any circumstances, ask how the war was actually going. Benjamin had asked once. Owen had laughed for a full minute, and then bought him a drink out of pity. "Morning, sunshine," Owen said now, ducking through the workshop hatch with 2 mugs of something the galley optimistically labeled coffee and the crew accurately labeled the brown. He was human too, one of the 4 aboard, which meant the humans clung together the way survivors of an embarrassing party do. "You look like you slept in a machine." "I slept near a machine. There's a difference." Benjamin swung out of the hammock and caught the mug. The number 3 strut's talking again. The number 3 strut is always talking. It's the ship's most social component. Owen leaned against the workbench, displacing a tray of couplings that Benjamin had spent 20 minutes sorting. "Half the Thessians think you're wasting effort keeping this bucket flying. The other half think you're some kind of grease wizard. I've been telling everyone it's both." Reassuring. The truth, which Benjamin kept to himself, was that he loved the ugly old ship the way you love a stray dog with 3 legs and a bad attitude. Nobody else wanted her. She was his. And keeping something alive that everyone had written off, well, that was more or less the whole of Benjamin's personality, if you asked Owen, which people frequently did not. The comm panel chimed. Not the ordinary chime. The other one. The sharp double note that meant the request was coming down from a rank that could have you reassigned to hull scraping by lunch. Owen's grin evaporated. "That's vanguard priority," he said. "That's her." There was no need to specify who her was. On the Ardent, there was exactly one her that made grown Thessian soldiers lower their voices and check that their boots were properly fastened. Aria, commander of the vanguard, the emerald-skinned officer whose honor marks, they said, ran so thick along her arms that you could read the last century of the war off her like a ledger. Benjamin had seen her exactly twice, both times from a respectful distance, and both times she had radiated the specific energy of a woman who had personally disappointed death and expected it to try harder next time. Her ears, long, tapered, elegant in the way of the whole Thessian people, always seemed to be angled slightly toward whatever she was about to dismantle. "Probably wants a status report on the strut." Benjamin said, reaching for the panel. It was not the strut. The cargo servitors brought it in on a grav sled 20 minutes later, and the workshop went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the ship. Benjamin set down his mug. He walked a slow circle around the sled, and something in his chest did an unfamiliar, complicated thing. It was armor, battle armor, Thessian make, old and beautiful and utterly, comprehensively destroyed. The chest plate was cracked from collar to hip. The lattice underneath was shattered in a dozen places, honor marks scored right across the fractures, so that even the record of her victories had been broken. He knew whose it was without being told. You didn't need to be told. It was written all over the thing, in a language of scars. A servitor extended a slate. Benjamin read the attached note, which said, in the clipped Thessian shorthand of every other tech who'd looked at it, unsalvageable. Recommend recycle. He read it twice. Then he set the slate down very gently and felt the old familiar insult rise in him on the armor's behalf, the exact indignation he felt every time someone gave up on something that wasn't theirs to give up on. Unsalvageable, he said aloud to the empty room and the broken suit and the ship still humming its considering hum. We'll see about that. The thing about repairing something nobody believes in is that you have to start by ignoring everybody, and Benjamin had a gift for it. He cleared the workbench with one sweep of his forearm, sent Owen off with a promise that no, he would not do anything stupid, and then set about doing something stupid, which was staying up all night to raise the dead. He began the way he began everything, by looking, not touching, looking. You could learn more about a machine in 10 minutes of honest staring than in an hour of poking at it with tools, and armor was only a machine that had learned to be worn. So he pulled a stool up to the grav sled and read the suit the way another man might read a diary he'd found in a war grave. It told him things. The chest plate crack was fresh, plasma-edged, the kind of wound that should have killed whoever was inside it and clearly hadn't, because the seals had held just long enough. Older damage lived beneath the new, a puckered weld along the left flank where a much younger armorer had done a hasty, brave, imperfect job. And Benjamin found himself oddly protective of that long-ago colleague, whoever they'd been. The honor marks ran everywhere, etched into the lattice itself, and the awful thing was how the new fractures cut right across them, breaking the record of the victories mid-sentence. It was like watching someone tear a page out of a book at the good part. All right, he murmured, rolling up his sleeves. Let's put your story back together. He worked. Time did the thing it did when the work was good. It stopped being a line and became a fog, warm and total. He drew out the shattered lattice rods one at a time and grew each replacement in the fabricator from raw Thessian alloy, matching not just the shape but the grain, the way a good restorer matches brushstrokes. He resealed the chest plate from the inside out, layering the mend so the honor marks could be rescored over the repair later by whoever had the right to do such things. He did not, notably, sleep. The ship hummed its considering hum. He hummed back at it, off-key, and the two of them kept each other company through the small hours. It was somewhere around the third hour that he found the thing that was not metal. He'd opened the spinal housing to check the actuator bundle, expecting the usual nest of fibers, and instead his light caught a lattice of crystalline threadwork woven through the suit's core, dark, dormant, but organized in a way no structural component had any business being. Benjamin went very still. He'd read about these. Every human seconded to a Thessian ship had heard the stories, and dismissed them as the sort of thing soldiers said to make their gear sound scarier. Companion intelligences, suit minds, grown alongside a warrior and bonded to a single suit for a whole career. Supposedly they'd stopped making them generations ago. Supposedly the old ones were all dead. This one was not all the way dead. It was just very, very tired. Well, hello, Benjamin whispered, and against every ounce of professional judgment he owned, he threaded a diagnostic line into the crystalline lattice and fed it the gentlest trickle of current he could manage, the electronic equivalent of leaving soup outside a hermit's door. For a long moment, nothing. Then the threadwork warmed, faint gold blooming through the dark like sunrise seen through closed eyelids, and a thin filament of awareness pressed against his diagnostic line, wary and weak and unmistakably curious. "You are not her," said something directly into his readout in careful halting glyphs. "Who touches the suit?" "Benjamin," he said, and then felt ridiculous and said it anyway. "I'm the engineer. I'm fixing you. Both of you, I guess. You've been out for a while, friend." The gold pulsed, considering. "She brought me here to be unmade." "She brought you here to be fixed," Benjamin corrected, with more confidence than the recycle order strictly justified. "There's a difference. I keep having to explain the difference to people. Get some rest. I've got you." Whether it understood, he couldn't say. But the gold dimmed to a slow, even pulse, like breathing, and Benjamin worked the rest of the night with the strange and tender sense that he was no longer alone in the room. Dawn on the Ardent was a lie told by the lighting system, a slow amber warming of the corridor strips, and Benjamin was tightening the last collar seam when the workshop hatch opened and Aria walked in. He straightened up, wiping his hands, and his prepared words evaporated. She had come, he understood at once, expecting to collect scrap. She crossed to the bench and stopped, and for a long moment she simply looked at the armor standing whole on its cradle. Every fracture sealed, every seam restored, the broken record of her 100 campaigns made ready to be written again. Her long ears had gone perfectly still. Her scarred emerald hands hung at her sides. Benjamin braced for the cold nod. The clipped word. The dismissal of a warrior who had learned gratitude was a luxury for people who expected to survive. Instead, she turned and crossed the small distance between them and took his face in both her scarred hands and kissed him, fierce and unhesitating and entirely without permission, in the flickering amber light of the workshop. When she finally drew back, her composure had already returned, folding down over her like a visor. But her eyes had not returned with it. They stayed on his face, searching, startled, as though even she could not account for what her hands had just done. Neither of them said a word. The suit AI, wisely, kept its glow to itself. She was gone before either of them found anything to say, which Benjamin decided later was probably a mercy, because whatever he'd have found to say would almost certainly have been terrible. Aria collected her armor with 2 crisp words to the servitors, something in clipped Thessian that Benjamin didn't need a translator to recognize, as "don't scratch it," and then she swept out of the workshop with the whole thing balanced on the grav sled and her composure balanced on top of that, and the hatch closed. And Benjamin stood alone in the amber light with his heart doing an impression of the number 3 strut. "Right," he said, to nobody. That happened. The trouble with a thing like that happening is that it refuses to stop having happened. Benjamin spent the next several hours trying to work and discovering that his hands, so steady over crystalline thread work at 3 in the morning, had developed opinions of their own. He dropped a coupling. He dropped the coupling he picked up to replace the coupling he'd dropped. He recalibrated the same actuator 3 times before noticing it had been fine after the first. "You're glowing," Owen observed from the hatch, with the pitiless delight of a man who has spent years waiting for exactly this. "Not metaphorically. You're actually flushed. What happened? Did the strut finally propose?" "Nothing happened." "Your face says a novel happened. Your face says a trilogy happened." Owen came in, hoisted himself onto the workbench with the air of a man settling in for a long and satisfying afternoon, and folded his arms. "Come on. I've watched you talk to a coolant baffle like it was your grandmother. Whatever's rattling you has to be spectacular. Spill." And Benjamin, who had exactly 1 confidant aboard a ship of 2,000 and could not have kept the thing inside him with a pressure seal, spilled. Owen's face went through a truly remarkable sequence of expressions: skepticism, alarm, glee, and then a kind of awed horror that settled in and made itself comfortable. "The commander," he said, very slowly, savoring each syllable. "Aria, the one the veterans won't make eye contact with. The one who supposedly bit a concordance drone in half out of principle. That commander walked into your workshop and kissed you." "I don't think the drone thing is true." "I don't care if the drone thing is true, Benjamin. Focus. This is the best thing that has ever happened aboard this ship, and you're worried about drone provenance." Owen pressed both hands to his own face. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I stood there, like a coat rack. A very surprised coat rack." "So your play, your considered romantic strategy, was to impersonate furniture." "It wasn't a strategy, it was ambush. There's a difference." "There's always a difference with you," Owen said, sliding off the bench, thoroughly satisfied. "I'm going to go not tell anyone about this, which is going to be the hardest thing I've ever done, and I have survived 4 hull breaches." He paused at the hatch. "For what it's worth, nobody fixes a broken thing that well unless they mean it. She'd have known that the second she looked at it. Whatever she did it to the version of you that stayed up all night." He left before Benjamin could decide whether that was comforting or the opposite. What followed, over the next several days, was the most excruciatingly polite standoff Benjamin had ever been party to. He and Aria did not avoid each other. Exactly. The Ardent was too small and too broken for anyone to avoid the engineer for long, but they conducted their unavoidable encounters with a formality so complete it practically had its own gravity. She would appear in a corridor. He would nod. She would incline her head 1 precise degree. They would exchange technical information about her armor's integration in tones you could have used to defuse a bomb. And then they would part, both walking a little too straight, and Benjamin would spend the next 20 minutes replaying it and finding new ways to have handled it worse. The suit AI did not help. He'd left a diagnostic thread bonded to the armor's core, ostensibly to monitor the healing lattice, and the newly woken intelligence had decided that Benjamin was, if not her, then at least the next most interesting thing in the universe, and it had a great deal it wished to share. It messaged him at odd hours. It had, it explained, been dormant for 11 years, ever since the wound that had nearly killed its commander at the Cerro Gap, and it had spent that entire time in a state it described as listening to her heartbeat and being unable to answer, which Benjamin found so quietly devastating he had to sit down. And now that it was awake, it wanted to talk. Chiefly, it wanted to talk about her. "She is not sleeping," it reported one night, unprompted. "She stands in the armory and looks at me and does not put me on. Her pulse is elevated. This is inconsistent with her behavior across 100 campaigns. I have cross-referenced. The variable that changed is you." "You can't just tell me that," Benjamin whispered, horrified, delighted, appalled at himself for being delighted. That's private. That's her private." "I have no one else to tell," the AI said, with the guileless honesty of a thing 11 years starved of conversation. "And you fixed the fractures that broke her marks. I calculate you are trustworthy at 91%. What's the other 9? You talk to the ship. This suggests instability." Benjamin was still deciding whether to be offended when the corridor lights flickered. Not the ordinary flicker of an old ship, but a hard, deliberate dimming. Ship-wide. The kind that meant power was being quietly rerouted to systems that only mattered when things were about to get bad. He knew that dimming. Everyone aboard knew that dimming. It was the Ardent holding her breath. And in the armory, 3 decks up, a suit of freshly mended armor came alive on its cradle, because its commander had just been handed an order she had not shared with a single soul aboard her ship, an order that had already, quietly, decided how all of them were going to die. The order, as Benjamin learned it, in pieces, sideways, the way you learn anything important on a warship, had a beautiful name, because the ugly ones always do. Fleet Command called it holding the line. What it meant in practice was that the Ardent had been assigned a position at the mouth of the Kestrel Drift, directly athwart the Concordance advance, and instructed to hold it for as long as she could. There was no relief coming. There was no relief planned. The main Thessian fleet was regrouping half a system away, and the Ardent's entire strategic purpose was to be a rock the swarm had to spend time going around. And the measure of her success would be how long she took to die. Benjamin found this out at the worst possible moment, which is to say during the skirmish, which is to say, while he and Aria were sealed together in a collapsing section of the aft hull, with roughly 4 minutes of atmosphere between them and a very tedious death. It had not started as a shared crisis. It had started with a concordance picket, a scout element, 3 drones, testing the Ardent's teeth ahead of the main body. The ship had answered, because the ship always answered, and in the exchange a lance of concordance fire had walked across the aft hull and folded the number 3 strut, the social one, the dramatic one, the one Benjamin had been nagging about for a week, clean in half. The section sealed itself with the enthusiasm of a very old ship doing a very hard thing, which is to say badly, and Benjamin had come sprinting to weld it manually, and Aria had already been there, in her armor, holding a buckled bulkhead in place with the whole strength of her frame, while the room tried to breathe itself out into vacuum. "You," she said, through the armor's speaker, not looking around. "Me," he agreed, slapping a patch charge onto the worst of the tear. "Don't let go of that." I had not planned to. They worked. It was, Benjamin would reflect much later, the first time they had done anything together that wasn't excruciatingly polite, and there is nothing like a shared and imminent death to burn the manners right off 2 people. He welded. She braced. The suit AI fed him structural readings through his diagnostic thread without being asked, cheerfully cross-referencing the failing seams, and between the 3 of them the room slowly, grudgingly, stopped trying to kill them. And then there was nothing left to do but wait for the pressure to equalize, and they were alone, and the silence they'd been so carefully maintaining for days had nowhere left to hide. "You knew," Benjamin said. It wasn't an accusation. He was too tired for accusation. "The line, holding it. You knew what the order meant when you got it, that we're not supposed to survive this." For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then the armor's helm folded back with a soft hydraulic sigh, and there she was, emerald skin sheened with the effort, long ears flat with exhaustion, and she looked at him the way you look at the one person in a room who might understand. "I have held 100 lines," she said. "I have never once been ordered to lose one on purpose. There is a difference." A ghost of something crossed her face. "You would appreciate the difference. You are very fond of them." "I am," Benjamin admitted. "It's a whole personality flaw." He set the welder down. His hands, he noticed, were steady now. Funny how that worked. "About the workshop. We are not going to speak of the workshop. We're absolutely going to speak of the workshop, Aria. We're going to die in about a week, and I've spent 4 days impersonating a coat rack about it." "A what?" "It doesn't matter. The point is, you kissed me, and then we both pretended you'd handed me a data pad, and I have questions, and this is the first time in days you haven't been wearing your composure like a second suit, so." He spread his hands. "Ask me anything back. Fair's fair." She looked at him for a long moment, and then, astonishingly, she laughed, low and rough and clearly out of practice, the laugh of a woman who had forgotten she owned one. "You fixed the marks," she said, quieter. "The others said the suit was dead. That he was dead." Her hand went to the chest plate, over the crystalline core. 11 years I have carried him silent, and a human I had spoken to twice stayed awake through a night and gave him back to me and asked for nothing. I did not have a word for what that was, so I used my hands." Her ears tilted, wry. "It was not, I think, regulation." 94%, the suit AI offered helpfully into Benjamin's readout. He ignored it with heroic effort. "There's something else," the AI added, and this time its tone had changed. The guileless brightness gone, replaced by something careful. "I was ordered to bury it, but you asked her to ask me anything, and she is listening. And I have been silent for 11 years, and I am tired of burying things." Aria went still. "He speaks to you?" "Constantly. He rates my trustworthiness. It fluctuates." Benjamin frowned at the readout. "What were you ordered to bury?" And the suit AI, alive again and done with silence, showed them both. Projected straight from its crystalline memory onto the buckled bulkhead in flickering gold, 11-year-old recon data from the Cerro Gap. The wound that had nearly killed Aria, the thing she'd been reaching for when she took it. A concordance formation, and at its heart, half glimpsed and never reported, a single vast structure the swarm had been protecting, a coordinating core, a mind behind the frost. Benjamin looked at it for a long time. Then, because he was an engineer and could not help himself, he started to sketch. The plan was insane, which Benjamin considered a point in its favor, because the sane plan had already been written, and its title was Everyone on the Ardent Dies on Schedule. He laid it out on the workshop bench at 0300 with Aria on one side, Owen on the other, and the suit AI throwing diagrams onto the wall in gold. And it went like this. The Ardent had been ordered to sit at the mouth of the Kestrel Drift and be a rock. Fine. Let her be a rock. But a rock that the swarm has to flow around is a rock that the swarm brings its whole body past, including, if the 11-year-old recon held, the coordinating core, tucked deep in the formation where it felt safe. Nobody strikes at a core. Nobody knows exists. Nobody expects the sacrificial rock to have teeth pointed inward. You want to use the position command handed us to die in, Aria said slowly, as the position from which to strike the thing they don't know is there. I want to use the fact that everyone's already decided we're dead, Benjamin corrected, as the best camouflage in the galaxy. Nobody watches a corpse. The swarm won't screen against a threat from a ship it's already counted as killed. We're not on anyone's board anymore, Aria. Not commands, not the concordances. That makes us the one free piece. Owen looked at the diagram, then at Benjamin, then at the commander of the vanguard, and said with the weary courage of a man who had survived 4 hull breaches, I want it on record that I think this is going to kill us, and that I'm in. The suit AI's gold pulsed. 98%, it said, which Benjamin took to mean the same thing. It took 2 days to build. Benjamin did not sleep, which by now was less a hardship than a lifestyle. The idea was brutally simple in the way the best engineering always was. The Ardent's dying reactor, instead of being spent slowly across a doomed rearguard action, would be dumped all at once, every joule the old ship had left, into a single overloaded lance, fired point blank the instant the coordinating core came within range. 1 shot. There would not be a second. There would not, in all likelihood, be a ship after the first. But the suit AI still carried the core's resonance signature in its 11-year-old memory, which meant that Aria, in her armor, wired directly into the Ardent's targeting lattice, could put that single impossible shot exactly where it needed to go in the quarter-second it would be possible to take it. Which meant the plan lived or died on her. As, Benjamin reflected, most things seemed to. They came for the Ardent at the 18th hour of the 3rd day, and the swarm came the way it always came, not as ships but as a tide, a spreading silver frost of drones and mouths and folded wreckage, blotting out the stars at the mouth of the drift. The bridge crew held position. That was the order. Hold the line. They held it beautifully. They held it while the frost closed over them, while the hull screamed, while the number 3 strut's replacement buckled, and Benjamin swore at it from the reactor deck with tears in his eyes, and the whole time Aria stood locked into the targeting cradle, armored, silent, her long ears flat, and her eyes fixed on the readout where the core's resonance would appear. And then Command's voice came over the comm, a fleet admiral half a system away, and it did the thing Benjamin had been dreading. It ordered Aria to hold, to keep holding, to spend the ship the slow way, as designed, to buy the maximum time. Firing the reactor now in 1 shot would end the Ardent's usefulness as a delaying rock. It was a direct order. It was, if you followed it, a death with all the honor a warrior could ask for, and none of the point. The core's signature bloomed on the readout. Commander, the admiral's voice said, hold your position. That is an order. Confirm. Aria did not move. Benjamin watched her through the reactor deck feed, watched 100 campaigns worth of honor marks and obedience, and a whole life built on the sacredness of the order sit on one side of a scale, and on the other side, one exhausted human engineer's insane diagram, and the frost closing in, And a chance all, just a chance all, to do something better than die well. Aria, Benjamin said softly, over the private thread. Not the plan, not the physics, just her name. She turned her head a single degree, the way she did, and the ghost of that out-of-practice laugh crossed her face one last time. I have held 100 lines, she said, to the admiral, to the ship, to all of it. I will not lose this one on purpose. And she fired. The Ardent gave up everything she had left in a single blinding instant, every jewel, every year, the whole stubborn, dramatic, three-legged life of her, down the length of one overloaded lance, guided by an 11-year-old memory and the steadiest hands in the vanguard, straight into the heart of the frost. Benjamin was thrown from his feet. The reactor deck went white, then black, then the deep red of emergency light. Something enormous was screaming, and he couldn't tell if it was the ship or the swarm or the core or himself, and the whole battered, beloved bulk of the Ardent bucked like a struck bell and began at last to come apart around them. But the frost that had folded 100 fleets, the tide with no face to hate, the frost faltered. What a mind behind a swarm does when you kill it, Benjamin learned, is nothing dramatic at all. There is no death scream from 10,000 drones, no obliging explosion. The frost simply forgot how to be frost. One instant it was a coordinated tide with a purpose it had never once explained to anyone. The next, it was 10,000 separate machines that had lost the thing telling them where to point, drifting apart at the mouth of the Kestrel drift like a flock whose sky had been taken away. The Thessian main fleet, regrouping half a system out and expecting to find a corpse where the Ardent had been, found instead a scattering, leaderless swarm and a debris field, and did the only sensible thing, which was to fall on the confusion and finish it. Benjamin missed all of that, on account of being unconscious under a collapsed coolant baffle with a very good view of the emergency lighting. He woke to Owen's face, which was a mixed blessing. There he is, Owen said, with enormous relief and immediately corrupting it. The grease wizard, the coat rack, the man who blew up a god with a broken ship and slept through the applause. Did we win? Benjamin's voice came out like the number 3 strut on a bad day. We won so hard the fleet doesn't know what to do with it. They sent a rescue element expecting to recover nothing. They're calling it the Kestrel miracle. Owen helped him sit up amid the wreckage of the reactor deck, which was, Benjamin noted, still technically a deck, which was more than he'd budgeted for. The Ardent held together. Barely. She's not flying anywhere under her own power ever again, but she held together long enough. Stubborn old thing. Course she did, Benjamin said, and was appalled to find his eyes stinging. She's dramatic, not stupid. They towed her home. That was the part that undid Benjamin, watching the tugs latch onto the ruined bulk of the Ardent and haul her out of the drift, 3 refits past retirement, held together with prayer and spite and his swearing. The ship nobody had wanted, and everybody had written off, dragged back into the light as the vessel that broke the Concordance advance. He'd spent his whole life keeping alive the things people gave up on. It had never once, before now, worked out on this scale. Command's reckoning with Aria was quieter and sharper. She had disobeyed a direct order from a fleet admiral in the middle of an engagement. That the disobedience had won them the impossible did not, in the eyes of certain Thessian officers, entirely erase the fact of it. Honor was a heavy suit, and some of them wore it in the joints. There was a hearing. Benjamin was not invited, which drove him quietly out of his mind for the better part of a day, until Aria walked into the medical bay where they were reassembling him and told him how it had gone, because apparently that was a thing they did now, told each other things. They wished to censure me, she said, settling onto the edge of the cot with the wariness of a woman unused to sitting still. The Admiral argued for it at length. He is very fond of the difference between a lawful order and a lucky one. Her ears tilted, dry. But it is difficult to court-martial the officer who won the war front. So instead they gave me a commendation and a great deal of pointed silence, and I have accepted both. I find I do not mind the silence. I have spent 100 campaigns being spoken of in lowered voices. It is restful for once to have earned it honestly. And the suit? Benjamin asked. The Corps came through? For an answer, the armor, propped on its cradle across the bay, whole, its honor marks freshly rescored over Benjamin's men's by Aria's own hand, pulsed a warm, deliberate gold. 100%, said the suit AI with what Benjamin had learned to recognize as smugness. I have recalculated. You talked to the ship, and the ship won a war. I withdraw my concern regarding your stability. It appears to have been an asset. He's insufferable now, Aria said, with helpless fondness. He has decided he is a hero. I cannot get him to be quiet. He was quiet for 11 years, Benjamin said. Let him have this. Thank you, the suit AI said, and then, after a pause that was almost delicate, I listened to her heartbeat for 11 years and could not answer. I want it recorded that I am now answering. That is all. That is the whole of what I wanted. And it dimmed to its slow, even-breathing pulse, content at last, a thing given back its voice, choosing to use it gently. Which left the two of them, and the thing neither of them had ever quite said. So, Benjamin said, the workshop. The workshop, Aria agreed. And this time she did not deflect, did not fold her composure down over her face like a visor. She looked at him, emerald and scarred and tired and unguarded, the commander of the vanguard sitting on the edge of a cot in a wrecked medical bay, and she let herself simply be looked at in return. I used my hands because I had no word, she said. I have had some days to find one. It is not a Thessian word, and it is not, I think, regulation, and it terrifies me considerably more than the frost ever did. Her ears tilted. But I am reliably informed that the sane option was to die on schedule, and I have developed a distaste for the sane option. Benjamin, who had spent 4 days impersonating furniture and a lifetime refusing to give up on unsalvageable things, found that his hands were perfectly steady. He reached out and took one of hers, scarred, green, warrior's hands that had put an impossible shot through the heart of a god, and held it like something worth keeping. For the record, he said, I don't do the cold nod. I never learned. I only know how to fix things I'm not willing to lose. I had noticed, said Aria, and kissed him, unhurried this time and unhesitating, and entirely without ambush, in the ordinary light of a ship that had, against every reasonable accounting, brought them both home. They gave the Ardent a plaque in the end, and a place of honor in a Thessian orbital dock where schoolchildren could come and look at the ship that broke the frost. But Benjamin never told any of them the real secret, the one thing he'd known before the first weld and understood better after the last, that nothing in this story was ever actually about the war. It was about a broken thing on a workbench that everyone had signed off as scrap, and a pair of hands that refused to agree. Think about that. Somewhere out there is something the world has already written unsalvageable across. A friendship, a dream, a version of yourself you buried 11 years ago and stopped expecting to answer. The clipboards have come by. The notes have been filed. Recommend recycle. And the terrible, quiet question the story leaves in your hands is this one. Who decided that? And why did you believe them? Because Aria's armor wasn't beautiful because it was undamaged. It was beautiful because of the fractures, because every honor mark ran across an old wound, because the whole record of a life was written in the places it had been broken and mended and broken again. We spent so much of ourselves trying to look like the frost never touched us. And here was a woman who wore 100 campaigns worth of scars into a room and let a stranger see all of them. And the stranger did not flinch. He stayed up all night making sure the story underneath could still be read. Maybe that's the only kind of love worth the name. Not the kind that finds you flawless, the kind that finds you fractured and reaches for the welder anyway. The kind that looks at the part of you everyone else gave up on and says, with no reward in it at all, we'll see about that. So here is what the story wants to know. Now that it's yours, what have you been treating as scrap that was only ever waiting for the right pair of hands? And harder, this one, whose hands have you been too proud or too afraid to let near your own broken places? Aria kissed him because she had no word for it. She spent 100 campaigns being spoken of in lowered voices, and it took one exhausted engineer asking for nothing to teach her that the bravest thing a warrior can do is not hold a line, but let herself be seen. You don't need a warship for that. You never did. The frost is always coming, for all of us, in one shape or another. The only question that has ever mattered is what you choose to fix, and who you let stay up through the night beside you while you do it. The end. Benjamin and Aria's story is over, friends. Before we go, please don't forget to leave a like below and your thoughts on the story in the comments. Subscribe to our channel for the next story, and see you in the next science fiction adventure.